March 15, 2024. Interstate 40, just outside Amarillo, Texas. The jackhammer's rhythmic pounding had been constant for 3 hours when it suddenly hit something that shouldn't have been there. Construction foreman Miguel Torres killed the engine and knelt in the dust, brushing away decades of compacted earth and asphalt. What emerged made his blood run cold. 8 feet below the highway, buried where no vehicle should ever be, sat a 1986 Chevrolet Caprice Classic. Russet brown. License, plates still attached. And here's what made seasoned investigators lose sleep. This section of Interstate 40 was paved in 1992. Whoever put this car here did it deliberately 6 years after the vehicle vanished. They buried it under what would become one of America's busiest highways, ensuring it would stay hidden forever. But that's not the worst part. When the forensics team finally pried open the trunk 3 days later, they found something that turned a 38-year-old missing persons case into something far more sinister. Inside a fireproof lockbox, sealed against time and decay, were 47 Polaroid photographs. Each one showed a father and daughter, alive and terrified, days after the world had given them up for dead. The photographs were dated, time-stamped, carefully organized. Someone had documented their captivity with methodical precision. The father's name was David Brennan. His daughter was Emma, just 11 years old when they vanished during a road trip to Mount Rushmore in June of 1986. For 38 years, their family believed they died in some tragic accident, their bodies lost to the vast American wilderness. But these photographs told a different story, a darker story. A story about what really happens when two people drive into the heartland of America and simply disappear. This is that story. Before we go any further, if you're captivated by cold cases that span decades, mysteries buried beneath layers of lies, and investigations that refuse to let the dead rest in peace, subscribe to Ultimate Crime Stories right now. Hit that notification bell, because the truth about what happened to David and Emma Brennan is more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail of how this mystery finally unraveled. Let's go back to where it all began. June 14, 1986. Cedar Falls, Iowa. The Brennan household was alive with the controlled chaos of departure day. David Brennan, a 37-year-old high school mathematics teacher, was a man who planned everything down to the minute. His road atlas sat on the kitchen table, the route to Mount Rushmore highlighted in yellow marker, with rest stops and gas stations circled in red. 3 days there, 2 days at the monument, 3 days back. 8 days total. He'd calculated the mileage, budgeted for meals, and even packed a first aid kit that would make an EMT jealous. His daughter Emma was his opposite in the best possible way. Where David was methodical, Emma was spontaneous. Where he planned, she dreamed. That morning, she'd packed and repacked her purple backpack 4 times, unable to decide between her favorite books and her growing collection of travel brochures. She'd been collecting them for months, ever since David surprised her with the trip as a reward for making the honor roll. Emma wanted to be a writer someday. She kept detailed journals about everything, filling spiral notebooks with observations about her classmates, descriptions of sunsets, and elaborate stories about adventures she imagined having. Linda Brennan, David's wife and Emma's mother, stood in the driveway, cradling their 3-month-old son, Michael. She was exhausted from sleepless nights and endless feedings, which was precisely why David had planned this trip. "You need rest," he told Linda. "Emma and I will have our adventure, and you can actually sleep for more than 2 hours straight." Linda had protested at first, guilt eating at her for not joining them. But David insisted. "We'll bring you back a presidential snow globe," he'd promised with that crooked smile she'd fallen in love with 15 years earlier. The last photograph ever taken of David and Emma together was snapped that morning by Linda. David stood beside the Caprice, one arm around Emma's shoulders. Emma held up a handmade sign that read Mount Rushmore or bust, with little drawings of the 4 presidents around the border. They were both grinning, completely unaware that this moment of joy would be frozen forever, that this image would soon be plastered on missing person posters across 6 states. They left at 8:47 a.m. Linda remembered the exact time because she checked her watch, calculating when she might expect their first call. David had promised to phone from every major stop. "You'll be sick of hearing from us," he joked as he backed out of the driveway. Emma waved from the passenger window, her brown hair catching the morning light, her smile wide and genuine and completely, heartbreakingly innocent. That was the last time Linda Brennan saw her husband and daughter alive. The first call came at 11:30 a.m. from a rest stop just across the Iowa-Nebraska border. Emma's voice bubbled with excitement as she described the world's largest truck stop they'd passed. David got on the line briefly. "Making good time," he reported. "Should hit Mitchell, South Dakota by mid-afternoon. Love you." The line clicked dead. Linda went back to feeding Michael, completely unaware that in a few short hours, her entire world would collapse. The second call never came. By 9 p.m. that night, Linda was pacing the kitchen, Michael finally asleep upstairs, the phone clutched in her hand. David was never late. Never. Even when he'd proposed to her, he'd arrived exactly on time, roses in hand, rehearsed speech ready. This silence was wrong. This absence was wrong. Everything in her bones screamed that something terrible had happened. She called the motel in Rapid City, where they'd reserved a room. "No, sir, ma'am," the clerk drawled. "Nobody by that name has checked in. Want me to hold the room another night?" Linda's hands shook as she hung up. She called the South Dakota Highway Patrol. The dispatcher was polite but firm. "Ma'am, they're probably just running late. Most folks don't report someone missing until 24 hours have passed. I'm sure your husband just lost track of time." But Linda knew better. She called David's brother in Minneapolis, his sister in Denver, his best friend from college. Nobody had heard from them. At 11:47 p.m., Linda Brennan filed a missing persons report with the Cedar Falls Police Department. The officer who took her statement was kind but clearly skeptical. "A lot of times, ma'am, people just need a break. Sometimes they extend their trips, forget to call home. I'm sure they'll turn up." They didn't turn up. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. June 15th, 1986, 3:47 p.m. This is the moment everything changed, though nobody knew it yet. A security camera at Mitchell Gas and Grocery in Mitchell, South Dakota captured grainy footage of David's Caprice pulling up to pump number 4. The timestamp is burned into the corner of the frame. David got out first, stretching his back, squinting against the afternoon sun. Emma emerged from the passenger side, already digging in her pockets for the spending money David had given her that morning. The store clerk, a 19-year-old named Tyler Morrison, would later tell police that Emma bought 3 postcards and a pack of grape bubble gum. "She was real chatty," Tyler recalled. "Told me all about how they were going to see Mount Rushmore, how her dad promised they'd do the audio tour twice if she wanted. Sweet kid. Real sweet." David paid for gas and cash, declined a receipt, and asked Tyler if the route to Rapid City was straightforward from here. "Straight shot up 90, Tyler confirmed. "Can't miss it." The security footage shows David and Emma walking back to the Caprice. Emma is reading one of her postcards, laughing at something. David ruffles her hair affectionately. They get in the car. The Caprice pulls away from the pump, turns right out of the parking lot, and disappears up Highway 90 North. That was the last confirmed sighting of David and Emma Brennan. They had 147 miles to go to reach Rapid City. The drive should have taken 2.5 hours. The road was straight, well-maintained, heavily traveled. There were no reported accidents that day. No severe weather. No construction delays. They simply vanished into the vast expanse of South Dakota prairie, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. When Linda's missing persons report finally triggered action 24 hours later, the investigation moved quickly. Sheriff Thomas Grayson of Pennington County, South Dakota, took personal charge of the case. Grayson was a 28-year veteran of law enforcement, a man who'd seen his share of missing tourists and lost hikers. But something about the Brennan case bothered him from the start. "Families don't just disappear," he told his deputies. "Not without a trace. Not in 1986, with highways full of witnesses and gas stations every 20 miles. The search began in earnest on June 17th. Helicopters swept the route between Mitchell and Rapid City. Search and rescue teams combed the ditches and gullies alongside Highway 90. Divers checked the Cheyenne River and White River, looking for any sign that the Caprice might have gone off the road into water. Local news stations broadcast the story every hour. Missing posters went up in every gas station, diner, and motel from Iowa to Montana. Emma's backpack was found on June 19th by a highway maintenance crew clearing trash from a rest area 40 miles west of Mitchell. The rest area wasn't on David's planned route, which immediately suggested they'd either gotten lost or been forced off course. Inside the backpack was everything you'd expect an 11-year-old to bring on a road trip. A half-finished Nancy Drew novel, a Walkman with a Cyndi Lauper tape inside, a bag of sour gummy worms melted into an inedible blob, and Emma's travel journal. That journal became the most painful piece of evidence Linda Brennan would ever touch. The entries were typical Emma. Enthusiastic, detailed, filled with exclamation points and little doodles in the margins. The last entry was dated June 15th, 2 p.m., written at a picnic table during a lunch stop. It read, "Dad, let me pick where we eat lunch. I chose this rest stop because it has horses in the field across the road. There are 4 of them, and one is a baby. Dad says it's called a foal. We're eating peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices. Dad is being goofy and making the presidents talk to each other in funny voices. He says Lincoln would definitely be friends with Washington, but Jefferson would probably annoy everyone by talking about architecture all the time. I love road trips with Dad. Just us. No baby crying, no mom being tired. Just me and Dad and the open road. This is the best day ever. The best day ever." Those 4 words would haunt Linda Brennan for the next 38 years. David's wallet was discovered 3 weeks later in a dumpster behind a truck stop in Wall, South Dakota, 60 miles from where the backpack had been found. The cash was gone, but his driver's license, credit cards, and a photo of Linda were still inside. Whoever took the wallet had wanted the money, but hadn't bothered to cover their tracks by destroying the evidence. Or perhaps they wanted the wallet found. Perhaps they wanted investigators to know this wasn't a simple case of getting lost in the wilderness. By August 1986, the investigation had stalled. Despite hundreds of tips called into the police hotline, despite countless hours of searching, despite Linda Brennan's increasingly desperate pleas on local news broadcasts, David and Emma remained missing. The prevailing theory among investigators was abduction, but without a ransom demand, without any witness to a crime, without any concrete evidence of foul play beyond an abandoned backpack and a ditched wallet, there was nowhere for the investigation to go. The case went cold. Not officially, Linda Brennan made sure of that, but practically. Detectives moved on to other cases. Search teams disbanded. The news cycle churned forward. By the time Michael Brennan celebrated his first birthday in March 1987, his father and sister had become statistics. 2 more names in the National Missing Persons Database. 2 more faces on aging posters that yellowed and curled at the edges in post office lobbies and highway rest stops. Linda never stopped looking. She couldn't. Every year on June 14th, the anniversary of their departure, she held a vigil at the Cedar Falls Courthouse. She hired 3 different private investigators over the years, draining her savings and maxing out credit cards, chasing leads that inevitably went nowhere. She appeared on local news programs, national true crime shows, even a psychic's radio broadcast in 1994, where a woman claimed to channel Emma's spirit. Linda was willing to try anything, believe anyone, follow any thread of hope, no matter how thin. But hope is a cruel thing when it's sustained for decades without resolution. By 2024, Linda Brennan was 65 years old. Her hair had gone silver. Her face was etched with lines of grief that no amount of therapy or time could erase. Michael, now 38, had grown up in the shadow of a sister he'd never known and a father he couldn't remember. He'd become an architect, married a kind woman named Sarah, had 2 children of his own. But he'd also grown up watching his mother slowly consume herself with searching for ghosts. "You have to let them go, Mom," Michael had said to her on more than one occasion. "You have to let them rest." "I can't," Linda always replied. "Not until I know what happened to them. Not until I bring them home." She never imagined she'd get that chance. She never imagined that 38 years after David and Emma disappeared, the Earth would literally give them back. March 15, 2024. The Interstate 40 expansion project outside Amarillo had been underway for 8 months, running only slightly behind schedule and moderately over budget, which made it an exemplary government construction project by most standards. The work was routine: widen the highway from 4 lanes to 6, improve drainage, replace aging overpasses. Miguel Torres had been running heavy equipment for 23 years, and he'd excavated thousands of tons of earth and asphalt without ever finding anything more interesting than an old boot or a rusted toolbox. That's why when his jackhammer hit something solid at 8 feet down, something that rang with a hollow metallic echo, his first thought was that they'd struck an old sewer line or perhaps an abandoned oil tank. It wasn't until his crew started clearing away the compacted dirt that the shape began to emerge. Curved metal, glass, the unmistakable silhouette of a vehicle. "Shut it down," Miguel shouted, waving his arms at the other equipment operators. "Shut everything down right now." Within 20 minutes, the site supervisor had contacted the Texas Department of Transportation, who contacted the Amarillo Police Department, who contacted the FBI. Because here's the thing that made this discovery immediately federal. The car was buried beneath a section of Interstate 40 that had been paved in 1992. Whoever had put this vehicle here had somehow accessed an active construction site 32 years ago, buried a car 8 feet deep, and then covered it up so thoroughly that it had remained hidden for 3 decades. The excavation took 2 full days. Forensic teams worked with painful slowness, documenting every inch of soil, every fragment of evidence. The car itself was remarkably well preserved. The airtight compression of earth and asphalt had created an almost hermetic seal. When they finally freed the Caprice and towed it to a secure FBI facility, it looked like it might have been buried yesterday rather than decades ago. The license plates told them everything they needed to know. Iowa plates. Registration expired June 1986. Registered owner, David Michael Brennan, for 12 Oak Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa. A quick database search pulled up the missing persons report filed 38 years earlier. 2 names: father and daughter. Vanished in South Dakota. Case never solved. Special Agent Marcus Webb was the first to open the trunk. Webb was a cold case specialist with the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children Division, a man who'd spent 20 years coaxing secrets from crime scenes that had long since gone silent. He'd seen things that would give most people nightmares for life. But even he wasn't prepared for what he found sealed inside that fireproof lockbox. 47 Polaroid photographs, each one carefully labeled with a date and time. Each one showing David and Emma Brennan very much alive in the days following their disappearance. The earliest photo was dated June 16, 1986, 9:14 a.m., approximately 18 hours after they'd been last seen at the gas station in Mitchell. It showed David and Emma sitting on a concrete floor, backs against a cinder block wall. David's arm was around Emma's shoulders. Emma was holding that day's edition of the Rapid City Journal. The headline was clearly visible: "Severe thunderstorms expected." Both of them stared at the camera with expressions that Agent Webb would later describe as aware and terrified. The photographs continued chronologically. June 17th, June 18th, June 19th. In each one, Emma held a different newspaper, proving beyond any doubt that these images were taken days after the official investigation had begun. Whoever held them captive wanted documentation, wanted proof. But proof of what? And for whom? The backgrounds in the photos revealed critical details. Cinder block walls painted institutional beige. A water heater visible in several shots. The brand name Rheem clearly legible. A single window set high in the wall, showing pine trees beyond, suggesting a basement in a forested area. An electrical panel with inspection stickers, one of which Agent Webb's team was able to enhance and read. Black Hills Electric Cooperative, inspected March 1984. But it was the progression of the photographs that told the real story. The story that made Agent Webb's jaw clench and his hands shake slightly as he laid them out in sequence on the examination table. In the early photos, David and Emma were together. David always positioned between Emma and the camera, always protective even in captivity. But starting with the photograph dated June 21st, David began to look different. His face was bruised. His left eye was swollen shut. He held his right arm at an odd angle, cradled against his body. Emma's expression had changed too, from terrified to something worse. Hopeless. June 22nd. David's condition had deteriorated. He appeared barely conscious, slumped against the wall. Emma sat beside him, holding his hand, her face streaked with tears. June 23rd. David was no longer in the photographs. From this date forward, every image showed Emma alone. Sometimes she sat in the corner, knees pulled to her chest. Sometimes she lay on a thin mattress, staring at nothing. In one photograph, she held a handwritten sign. The message was simple, devastating. Please help US. The final photograph was dated June 29, 1986. Emma sat at a small table, a bowl of soup in front of her, untouched. Her eyes were empty. The girl who'd written about the best day ever in her journal 2 weeks earlier was gone, replaced by a shell-shocked child who'd watched her father disappear and understood, on some fundamental level, that she was utterly alone. Agent Webb stepped out of the examination room and called Linda Brennan. It was a conversation he'd had variations of dozens of times in his career, but it never got easier. Mrs. Brennan, he began, his voice carefully neutral. We found your husband's car. The silence on the other end of a line lasted, so long he thought the connection had dropped. Then Linda's voice, barely a whisper. Are they? We don't know yet, Webb admitted. But we found evidence that suggests they were alive for at least 2 weeks after they disappeared. We're going to need you to come to Texas to help us identify some items. And Mrs. Brennan, I want you to prepare yourself. What we've found is going to be difficult to see. Linda Brennan arrived in Amarillo the next day, her son Michael at her side. When Agent Webb showed her the photographs, the sound that came out of her was something between a wail and a prayer. She touched the image of Emma holding the newspaper, her fingers trembling. That's her butterfly ring, Linda whispered. I bought it for her 9th birthday. She never took it off. Michael stood behind his mother, his face pale, staring at images of the father he couldn't remember and the sister he'd never known. They were alive, he said, the words coming out flat and strange. All this time we thought they died quickly, maybe an accident, and they were alive and suffering and nobody knew. Someone knew, Agent Webb corrected grimly. Whoever took these photographs knew. The FBI's investigation kicked into high gear. The first priority was identifying the location where the photographs had been taken. The electrical panel inspection sticker gave them a critical starting point. Black Hills Electric Cooperative served a specific region of western South Dakota and northeastern Wyoming. That narrowed the search area to approximately 3,000 square miles. But it was the water heater that provided the real breakthrough. The specific model of ream visible in the photographs was only manufactured between 1982 and 1989, and it was primarily sold to contractors and builders in the Mountain West region. The FBI cross-referenced installation records from Black Hills Electric Cooperative with building permits issued in the mid-1980s for properties with basements, which were relatively uncommon in that area due to the rocky soil. The search generated 217 possible properties. It would take weeks to investigate them all. While that investigation proceeded, Agent Webb focused on another angle, the car itself. How had someone buried a vehicle under an active highway construction site? The Interstate 40 expansion in that area had been completed in 1992, which meant whoever buried the Caprice had to have access to the site during construction. Webb pulled the contractor records and found that the primary company hired for the job was Hartwell Construction, a mid-size firm out of Oklahoma City. Hartwell Construction had employed 147 people during that project. Most were local hires, equipment operators, laborers, truck drivers. But one name jumped out at Webb the moment he saw it. Robert James Sutherland. Employed as a site supervisor from March 1992 to November 1992. Last known address, Rapid City, South Dakota. Webb ran the name through every database available. What came back made his blood run cold. Robert James Sutherland, born April 3, 1942, in Des Moines, Iowa. Former assistant principal at Cedar Falls High School, same school where David Brennan taught mathematics. Convicted in June 1985 of embezzling $47,000 from the school's activity fund. Sentenced to 3 years in prison. Released on parole in April 1986, just 2 months before David and Emma disappeared. The connection was impossible to ignore. Sutherland had worked alongside David Brennan. David had been the one who discovered the embezzlement, testifying against Sutherland at trial. By all accounts, Sutherland's career had been destroyed, his reputation ruined, his marriage ended in divorce. He'd gone to prison, a respected educator, and come out a bitter, broken man. And he'd been released from prison 8 weeks before David and Emma vanished. Webb pulled Sutherland's parole records. The man had been required to report to a parole officer monthly, but those records showed increasing noncompliance. Sutherland missed his August 1986 appointment. Missed September. A warrant was issued for his arrest in October, but he'd disappeared. The last confirmed sighting of Robert Sutherland was in late July 1986, when he'd cashed his final paycheck from a roofing company in Rapid City. Until he resurfaced in 1992, using his real name and social security number, to work on a highway construction project where he had the means, opportunity, and motivation to bury the evidence of his crimes under 8 feet of earth and asphalt. We need to find out if Sutherland is still alive, Webb told his team. And we need to find that basement. The answer to both questions would come within 48 hours. And what the FBI discovered would turn this case from a decades-old mystery into an active rescue operation. Because the photographs had revealed something that nobody had noticed at first. Something that only became clear when a forensic analyst examined them under specialized lighting. In the background of 3 photos, barely visible behind Emma, was a shadow on the wall. The shadow of someone else in the room. Someone small. Someone who wasn't David or Emma. There had been a third person in that basement. And if the timeline was right, they might still be alive. March 20th, 2024. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, Virginia received the complete set of photographs via secure digital upload. Special Agent Dr. Sarah Chun, a forensic image analyst with 15 years of experience, began her examination at 6 a.m. and didn't stop until well past midnight. What she discovered in those images would break the case wide open. There's someone else in these photos, she told Agent Webb via video conference the next morning. Look at photo 17, dated June 24th. See the shadow on the floor behind Emma? That's not David. David's shadow would be longer, cast from a different angle. This shadow belongs to someone shorter, smaller. Probably another child. Webb felt his stomach drop. Are you telling me there was another victim? I'm telling you there was another person present when these photos were taken, Dr. Chin corrected. Whether they were a victim or something else, I can't determine from images alone. But Webb, there's more. Look at photo 23, June 26th. Emma's looking directly at the camera, but her eyes aren't focused on the lens. She's looking slightly to the right. There's someone standing next to the photographer. Someone she knows, or at least recognizes. The implications were staggering. If Sutherland had another child in that basement, it meant this wasn't a crime of passion or revenge. It was something calculated, organized, sustained. It meant Sutherland had been taking children for longer than anyone realized. Agent Webb immediately expanded the investigation. He pulled missing children reports from South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana, covering 1984 to 1990. The search parameters were specific. Girls between ages 8 and 14 disappeared under suspicious circumstances, never found. 17 cases matched the criteria. 17 families who'd spent years not knowing what happened to their daughters. Webb's team began the painstaking process of cross-referencing each case with Sutherland's known locations and employment history. Meanwhile, in South Dakota, the search for the basement location had narrowed considerably. Of the 217 properties initially identified, 189 had been eliminated through title searches, inspection records, or simple satellite imagery showing the structures had been demolished. That left 28 properties requiring physical investigation. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison led the ground team. Morrison was a 12-year veteran of the FBI's evidence response team, someone who'd processed crime scenes from Florida swamps to Alaskan tundra. She approached each property with methodical precision, comparing the architectural details visible in the photographs to the actual structures. On March 23rd, Morrison's team arrived at property number 14, 4847 Timber Creek Road, 37 miles outside Custer, South Dakota. The building was a two-story hunting lodge built in 1967, sitting on 8 acres of heavily forested land. County records showed it had been owned by Harold Sutherland from 1965 until his death in 1991, when it passed to his nephew Robert Sutherland. Robert had sold the property in 1996 to a holding company based in Nevada. That holding company had declared bankruptcy in 2003, and the property had eventually reverted to county ownership due to unpaid taxes. It had been sitting vacant and forgotten for 21 years. Morrison stood in the overgrown driveway, comparing the building to enhanced images from the photographs. The window placement matched. The type of cinder block visible in the basement photos matched the era of construction. Even the pine trees in the background aligned with the species common to this elevation and latitude. "We need to get inside," Morrison told her team. The front door had been boarded over years ago, but time and weather had warped the wood. It took less than 5 minutes to gain entry. The smell hit them immediately. Mildew, rot animal waste, and underneath it all something else. Something that made Morrison's hand instinctively move to her weapon. The main floor was what you'd expect from an abandoned building. Furniture covered in dust and bird droppings, wallpaper peeling in long strips, evidence of raccoons and possibly bears having sheltered inside during winter months. But it was just a decaying building until they found the basement stairs. The door to the basement had been padlocked from the outside. The lock was rusted, but intact, which meant it had been secured and never opened again. Morrison used bolt cutters. The lock fell away with a metallic clatter that echoed in the empty house. The stairs descended into darkness. Morrison's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating concrete steps worn smooth in the center from decades of use. The air rising from below was colder, drier, and absolutely still, as if the basement had been holding its breath for 38 years. What they found at the bottom of those stairs matched the photographs. Exactly. Cinder block walls, painted institutional beige, now mottled with moisture stains and mold. The water heater, still in place, the Rheem logo faded but visible. The electrical panel with its inspection stickers. The high window, now covered with plywood from the outside, but the frame identical to what appeared in the photos. And in the corner, 2 separate enclosures had been constructed from chain link fencing. Cages, basically. Human cages. The larger one was approximately 10 feet by 8 feet. The smaller one was half that size. Both had padlocks on the doors. Both were empty now, but evidence of occupation was everywhere. In the larger enclosure, Morrison found a thin mattress, mostly rotted through, with faded cartoon characters on the pillowcase. A folding table and 2 plastic chairs. Board games stacked in the corner. Monopoly, sorry, checkers. Coloring books, crayons reduced to waxy nubs. Children's clothing in various sizes, rotted and mouse-chewed, but still recognizable. And there, tucked underneath the mattress, in a plastic bag that had protected it from moisture, was a spiral-bound notebook. Emma's handwriting filled the pages. Morrison's hands shook as she bagged it as evidence. This was Emma's voice, preserved across 38 years, about to tell them what had really happened in this basement. But it was a smaller enclosure that made Morrison's blood run cold. Inside was an adult-sized cot, a single blanket, and on the concrete floor, barely visible under a layer of dust, were dark stains. Blood stains. A lot of them. And there, leaning against the far wall, was a makeshift cross fashioned from 2 pieces of wood and bound with wire. Carved into the horizontal piece were the initials, DMB. David Michael Brennan. Morrison keyed her radio with trembling fingers. "We found them," she said. "We found where they were held. And Webb, you need to get a forensic team here now. We have what looks like a grave marker for David Brennan." The excavation of the property at Timber Creek Road began on March 24th. Ground-penetrating radar identified 3 anomalies in the backyard area behind the lodge. 3 locations where the soil density was inconsistent with the surrounding earth. 3 possible graves. Linda Brennan insisted on being present. Against Agent Webb's advice, against Michael's pleading, she drove to South Dakota and stood at the perimeter of the crime scene, watching as forensic anthropologists carefully excavated the first site. 4 feet down, they hit wood. A crude coffin constructed from untreated lumber, now rotted and collapsed. Inside were skeletal remains, partially decomposed clothing, and a wristwatch. The watch was immediately recognizable, a Timex with a leather band. The back engraved with "To David, love always, Linda and Emma, Christmas 1980. Linda Brennan collapsed when they showed her. Michael caught her before she hit the ground, holding his mother as she sobbed into his chest. 38 years of uncertainty finally, brutally resolved. The forensic anthropologist's preliminary report confirmed what everyone already knew. Adult male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, age consistent with late 30s. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Multiple fractures suggesting repeated impacts. Time of death estimated at late June 1986, based on decomposition rates and insect activity evidence. David Brennan had been beaten to death and buried in a shallow grave behind the hunting lodge where he and his daughter had been held captive. The other 2 graves were excavated over the following days, but they contained only animal remains, a dog and what appeared to be a deer. While the forensics team processed the property, Agent Webb focused on Emma's journal. Reading it was one of the most difficult things he'd ever done in his career, and he'd read confessions from serial killers, suicide notes from children, letters from victims who knew they were going to die. But Emma's journal was different because it documented the systematic destruction of a child's innocence in real time. The entries began June 16, 1986. Emma's handwriting was shaky, scared, but still recognizably hers. "A man took us. I don't know his name. He made Dad pull over on the highway. Said our tire looked flat. When Dad got out to check, the man grabbed me. Dad fought him, but the man had a gun. He made us get in his van. Dad keeps asking why. The man won't answer. He just drives. I'm so scared." June 17th. We're in a basement. The man tied Dad's hands. He put me in a cage, made a fence. There's a mattress and some books. The man brought us sandwiches, but Dad won't eat. He just keeps telling me it's going to be okay. But I can see his face. He's scared too. June 18th. The man took pictures of us today. He made us hold newspapers. He says it's proof we're alive, but he won't say proof for who. Dad tried to talk to him, asked him what he wants. The man said, "You took my life. Now I'm taking yours." I don't understand what that means. June 19th. Dad told me the man used to work at his school. Dad testified against him in court for stealing money. The man went to prison. He blames Dad for everything bad that happened to him. His wife left him. His kids won't talk to him. He lost his job. He says Dad destroyed him, and now he's going to destroy Dad. The entries continued day by day, documenting the horror of captivity. Sutherland brought them food, water, and newspapers. He seemed to want them alive, at least initially. But he also wanted them to suffer, particularly David. June 20th. The man makes Dad watch while he talks to me. He asks me about school, my friends, what I want to be when I grow up. He's nice to me, but it's scary nice. Dad tried to attack him today, broke free from his ropes, and ran at him. The man hit Dad with a pipe. Dad's eye is swollen shut, and his arm is broken. He can barely move. June 21st. Dad is getting worse. He has a fever. He keeps apologizing to me. Says he's sorry he couldn't protect me. Sorry he testified against a man. Sorry for everything. I told him it's not his fault, but he won't listen. The man just watches. He seems happy that Dad is suffering. June 22nd. Dad can't stand up anymore. The man put him in the other cage, the smaller one. Dad keeps telling me he loves me, over and over, like he's afraid he'll forget or I'll forget. I'm so scared. June 23rd. Something bad happened last night. I heard yelling, and then a loud noise like something falling. This morning the man came and took me out of my cage. He made me go upstairs. When I came back down, Dad was gone. His cage was empty. There was blood on the floor. The man said Dad is sleeping and I'll see him soon, but I know he's lying. I know Dad is dead. June 24th. I screamed all day. The man just sat in the corner and watched me. He didn't try to stop me or calm me down. He just watched. When I finally stopped because my throat hurt too much to scream anymore, he brought me soup and milk. He told me I need to eat to keep my strength up. I asked him where Dad is. He said Dad is in a better place now, somewhere he can't hurt anyone anymore. I hate him. I hate him so much. The entries after David's death changed in tone. Emma, stop fighting. Stop hoping. She became mechanical, documenting each day as a simple record of continued existence. June 28th. The man says I can't go home. He says I know too much and the police would take me away and ask questions, and he'd go to prison forever. He says if I'm good and do what he says, he'll take care of me. He says I can be his daughter now. I told him I already have a dad. He hit me. First time he's ever hit me. July 1986. The entries became sporadic. Emma wrote less. The observations more detached. August 1986. The man enrolled me in something called homeschool. He makes me do workbooks every day. Math, reading, science. He's teaching me to cook. He says I need to learn to be helpful around the house. What house? We live in a basement. December 1986. It's been 6 months. I think about Mom every day. I think about baby Michael. I wonder if they still think about me, or if they've moved on. The man says they've probably forgotten me by now, that people always forget. I don't want to be forgotten. February 1987. The man says we're moving. He sold this property. He says we're going to Montana, starting fresh. He gave me new clothes and a new name. He says from now on I'm Sarah. Sarah Sutherland. His daughter. If I ever tell anyone who I really am, he says he'll kill Mom and Michael. I believe him. So I'll be Sarah. Emma is dead, just like Dad. The journal ended there. The final entry was dated February 14th, 1987. Valentine's Day. Emma Brennan had been 11 years old when she was taken. She was 12 when she stopped being Emma and became Sarah. Agent Webb closed the journal and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled up the database of missing children cases he'd compiled. If Sutherland had kept Emma alive for 8 months in that basement, if he'd eventually moved her to Montana and raised her as his daughter, then she might still be alive. Somewhere out there, a woman in her late 40s might be living under the name Sarah Sutherland, completely unaware that the world had been searching for her for 38 years. Or fully aware and too terrified to come forward. The FBI's search focused on Montana. Robert Sutherland had worked various construction jobs between 1987 and 1996, leaving a paper trail of W-2 forms and tax returns. He'd lived in Billings, Great Falls, and finally Bozeman. School records showed a Sarah Jane Sutherland had enrolled in Billings Middle School in September 1987, transferring from homeschool. The enrollment photo showed a girl with brown hair, hollow eyes, and a forced smile. It was Emma. Even after a year of captivity, even with the weight loss and the trauma etched into her face, it was unmistakably Emma Brennan. Agent Webb traced Sarah Sutherland's life forward from that point. She'd graduated from Billings High School in 1994, attended Montana State University, studying nursing, graduated in 1999. Married a man named Daniel Cross in 2001. Changed her name to Sarah Cross. Had 2 children, a daughter in 2008, a son in 2010. She lived in Bozeman, Montana. Worked as a pediatric nurse at Bozeman Health. By all outward appearances, she was a normal woman with a normal life, completely unremarkable except for one thing. She had no history prior to 1987. No birth certificate. No elementary school records. No medical history before age 12. Because Sarah Sutherland had never been born. She'd been created from the broken pieces of Emma Brennan. Agent Webb had found her. After 38 years, he'd found Emma Brennan alive. But now came the hardest question of all. How do you tell a woman that her entire life is built on a lie? How do you tell her that the father she mourned, the man who died when she was 16 in what she believed was a heart attack, was actually the monster who'd murdered her real father and stolen her childhood? And how do you tell her that her mother has been searching for her, waiting for her, refusing to give up hope for nearly 4 decades? The answer, as it turned out, would require the kind of delicacy that only a trained psychologist could provide. March 29, 2024. Dr. Ellen Martinez, a clinical psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery and false identity cases, flew to Bozeman, Montana. She was accompanied by Agent Webb and a victim services coordinator from the FBI. They'd spent days planning this approach, consulting with experts, running through scenarios. No matter how they framed it, the conversation they were about to have would shatter Sarah Cross's understanding of her own life. They arranged to meet at the FBI's field office in Bozeman rather than approaching her at home or work. The last thing they wanted was to traumatize her in front of her family or colleagues. The request was formal but vague. We need to speak with you regarding a case you may have information about. Sarah agreed to come in during her lunch break. She arrived at 12:30 p.m., still wearing her nurse's scrubs, clearly puzzled but not alarmed. Dr. Martinez met her in the lobby, introduced herself, and led Sarah to a private interview room designed to be comfortable rather than intimidating. Soft lighting, upholstered chairs, a box of tissues on the table. Ms. Cross, thank you for coming in, Dr. Martinez began. I want to start by assuring you that you're not in any trouble. You haven't done anything wrong. But we need to ask you some questions about your childhood, specifically your memories from before 1987. Sarah's expression shifted slightly. A flicker of something. Wariness? Fear? She folded her hands in her lap. I was homeschooled until middle school. My childhood was pretty normal. Do you remember your mother? Dr. Martinez asked gently. My mother died when I was very young. My father raised me alone. Do you remember her name? Sarah hesitated. I know. Dad didn't like to talk about her. He said it was too painful. Dr. Martinez opened a folder and removed a photograph. It was the missing persons poster from 1986, showing Emma Brennan's smiling face alongside the text. Missing, Emma Brennan, age 11, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Sarah stared at the image. Her breathing quickened. Why are you showing me this? Do you recognize this girl? She looks. Sarah's voice trailed off. Her hands were shaking now. Dr. Martinez placed another photo on the table. Emma's school enrollment photo from Billings Middle School, 1987. The same girl, a year older, the smile forced. This is you, Sarah. This photo was taken when you enrolled in middle school under the name Sarah Sutherland. Yes, that's me, Sarah said, but her voice was uncertain now, wavering. Dr. Martinez placed a third photo down, the Polaroid from the basement, Emma holding the newspaper, David's arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at the camera with terrified eyes. Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. She pushed back from the table, hand over her mouth, eyes wide. No, she whispered. No, that's not. I don't. Your name is Emma Brennan, Dr. Martinez said softly. You were taken in June 1986, while on a road trip with your father, David. You were held captive for 8 months before the man who abducted you moved you to Montana and raised you as his daughter. His name was Robert Sutherland. He was convicted of embezzling money from the school where your father worked. Your father testified against him. Sutherland blamed your father for destroying his life. So he destroyed your father's life in return. Sarah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. My father, Robert, he saved me. He told me my mother didn't want me, that she gave me away, that he adopted me. He lied to you, Dr. Martinez said. Your mother never stopped looking for you. She's been searching for 38 years. Agent Webb placed another photo on the table, A recent picture of Linda Brennan, age 65, standing at her annual vigil, holding a candle. Emma's missing poster visible in the background. Sarah stared at the image. Something in her expression shifted. Some deep recognition. A memory surfacing from depths she'd buried for nearly 4 decades. "I remember her," she whispered. "I remember. She used to braid my hair. She sang to me at night. There was a song about mockingbirds." "Hush, little baby," Dr. Martinez said. "She told us she sang it to you every night." Sarah's sobs broke free then, years of suppressed trauma, of false memories, of a childhood stolen and rewritten. "He killed my dad, didn't he? My real dad. I remember. I remember blood on the floor. I remember screaming. I remember him telling me I couldn't go home, that I was his daughter now." "Yes," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "Robert Sutherland killed your father. We found your father's remains buried at the property where you were held. I'm so sorry." The room fell silent except for Sarah's crying. Agent Webb and Dr. Martinez waited, giving her time to process what she'd just learned, to reconcile the two versions of her life that had just collided. Finally, Sarah looked up, her face wet with tears. "Does she know? My mother, does she know you found me?" "We wanted to confirm your identity first," Agent Webb said. "We'd like to conduct a DNA test, with your permission, to establish, without any doubt, that you are Emma Brennan. And then, if you're willing, we can arrange for you to meet your mother." Sarah nodded slowly. "I have children, a husband, a whole life built on a lie. How do I explain this to them?" "We have counselors who specialize in helping families through situations like this," Dr. Martinez said. "You don't have to do any of this alone." The DNA test was conducted that afternoon. The results, expedited through the FBI's lab, came back on April 1st. 99.97% probability that Sarah Cross was the biological daughter of Linda Brennan. After 38 years, Emma Brennan had been found. April 5th, 2024. The FBI arranged for Linda and Sarah to meet at a neutral location, a family services center in Bozeman, chosen for its privacy and access to counseling support. Michael accompanied his mother, his own emotions a complicated tangle of joy at finding his sister and anger at the decades they'd lost. Linda walked into the room first. Sarah, Emma, whoever she was now, stood when Linda entered. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the space of 38 years. "You have your father's eyes," Linda finally said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry I forgot you," Sarah whispered. "You survived," Linda said, crossing the room, reaching for her daughter. "That's all that matters. You survived." They held each other and wept. Michael joined them, wrapping his arms around both women, this sister he'd never known, this mother who'd never given up hope. Later, when the initial storm of emotion had passed, they sat together and Sarah told them everything she could remember. The basement, the cage, her father's death, the years in Montana, being raised by the man who destroyed her family, the cognitive dissonance of loving and fearing Robert Sutherland simultaneously, of knowing something was wrong, but being too terrified to question it. "He kept newspaper clippings," Sarah said, "about missing children, about unsolved cases. I found them once when I was 14, hidden in his closet. I asked him about them. He told me he was interested in true crime, that it was just a hobby. But now I wonder, was I the only one? Or were there others?" That question would haunt the investigation in the weeks to come. The FBI searched Robert Sutherland's possessions, what little remained after his death in 1996. They found nothing conclusive, but the shadow analysis from the original photographs suggested there had been at least one other child in that basement. A child who'd never been identified. A shadow that had disappeared into history. The media coverage of Emma's recovery was intense, but carefully managed. Linda and Sarah requested privacy, which the FBI enforced strictly. The story that emerged was reported as a miracle. Daughter found alive after 38 years. Mother reunited with child she'd never stopped searching for. But behind the headlines was a more complicated truth. Sarah struggled to reconcile her two identities. She had children who called her mom, a husband who'd known her as Sarah for over 20 years, a career, a life. Emma was a ghost, a girl who'd existed for 11 years and then been erased. How do you resurrect a ghost? How do you be both Sarah and Emma at once? I don't know if I can be Emma again, she admitted to Dr. Martinez during one of their sessions. Emma died in that basement. Sarah is who I became to survive. I can honor Emma's memory. I can build a relationship with my mother and brother. But I can't go back to being an 11-year-old girl. That person is gone. Linda accepted this, though it broke her heart. I just want you in my life, she told Sarah. Whatever name you use, whatever form that takes. I just want to know you're alive and safe. They began building a relationship slowly, carefully. Weekly phone calls. Monthly visits. Sarah's children met their grandmother for the first time, learned about the grandfather who died protecting their mother, about the uncle they'd never known existed. It was strange and complicated and sometimes painful, but it was also a kind of healing. David Brennan's remains were finally laid to rest in May 2024 in the cemetery in Cedar Falls where his parents were buried. Linda, Sarah, Michael, and Sarah's entire family attended. The headstone read, David Michael Brennan, 1949 to 1986. Beloved husband and father. He died protecting what he loved most. But the case wasn't closed. Because in July 2024, a hiker in the mountains outside Custer, South Dakota found something that suggested this story was far from over. Buried in a collapsed mine shaft was another vehicle, a 1984 Ford Bronco, license plates from Nebraska, reported stolen in August 1985. And in the back seat was a child's backpack with a name tag, Jennifer Morrison, age 9, Omaha, Nebraska. Jennifer Morrison had been reported missing in August 1985, nearly a year before David and Emma were taken. Her case had never been solved. And now the FBI had to confront the possibility that Robert Sutherland's crimes had been far more extensive than anyone realized. The discovery of Jennifer Morrison's backpack triggered a massive expansion of the investigation. Agent Webb assembled a task force to review every missing child case in the Mountain West region from 1980 to 1990. If Sutherland had taken Jennifer Morrison in 1985 and Emma Brennan in 1986, how many others had there been? The answer was more disturbing than anyone wanted to believe. Cross-referencing Sutherland's employment history with missing children cases revealed a pattern. Wherever Sutherland worked, children disappeared. Not in large numbers, nothing that would trigger a serial killer investigation, but one here, one there. A girl from a rest stop in Wyoming in 1984. A boy from a campground in Montana in 1988. All cases that went unsolved. All children who'd vanished without a trace. But here's what didn't make sense. If Sutherland had been taking multiple children, where were they? Emma had been kept alive, raised as his daughter. Was that his pattern? Did he collect children? Create a false family to replace the one he'd lost? The FBI returned to the hunting lodge on Timber Creek Road. This time, they searched more carefully, looking for evidence beyond the basement. What they found was hidden in the crawl space beneath the main floor, a metal filing cabinet, rusted and dented, but still locked. Inside were documents that told a story the FBI hadn't anticipated. Letters from other men who shared Sutherland's interest in acquiring children. Men who'd responded to coded advertisements Sutherland had placed in underground newsletters. The letters were carefully worded, never explicitly stating their purpose, but the intent was clear. Sutherland hadn't been working alone. He'd been part of a network. One letter in particular caught Agent Webb's attention. Dated July 1986, written in response to Sutherland's description of recent acquisitions. The letter writer expressed interest in the younger item and offered to trade for one of similar value. The letter was signed with only initials, GH. The FBI's handwriting analysts compared the signature to known samples from people in Sutherland's orbit. The match came back to Gerald Hawthorne, the superintendent of Cedar Falls School District, the man who'd been implicated in the embezzlement scheme alongside Sutherland but never charged. Hawthorne had disappeared in 1987, last seen boarding a flight to Phoenix. His wife had filed for divorce in absentia. His assets had been seized for unpaid taxes. Everyone assumed he'd fled to avoid prosecution. But what if he'd been running from something else? Or running to something else? The FBI traced Hawthorne's movements after 1987. He'd changed his name to Gerald Henderson, moved to Arizona, and worked as a middle school counselor. A middle school counselor. The FBI felt their blood run cold. School records from Henderson's places of employment showed a concerning pattern. Wherever he worked, troubled children, kids from broken homes, kids in foster care, would sometimes disappear. Not run away, the reports always said. Just gone. And Henderson had always been the last person to see them, always the one who reported them missing, always the helpful counselor who'd been trying so hard to help these at-risk youth. Gerald Hawthorne, now using the name Gerald Henderson, was still alive. He was 79 years old and living in a retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona. He'd never been arrested, never been suspected, never been questioned about any of the disappearances. Until now. April 2025. The FBI arrested Gerald Henderson on a quiet Tuesday morning as he sat in his apartment watching a rerun of a game show. He didn't resist, didn't seem surprised. When Agent Webb read him his rights, Henderson just smiled slightly and said, "I wondered how long it would take you to find me." In custody, Henderson proved to be disturbingly forthcoming. Not out of remorse, he showed no capacity for remorse, but out of what seemed like pride. He'd been doing this for 40 years. He and Sutherland had met in prison in the early 1980s, both serving time for financial crimes, both nursing grievances against the world. They discovered a shared interest, a shared appetite for power over the powerless. When they were released, they'd maintained contact. Sutherland's abduction of David and Emma had been personal. Revenge for David's testimony. But Jennifer Morrison? That had been Henderson's request. He'd wanted a daughter. Sutherland had acquired one for him. What happened to Jennifer? Webb asked. Henderson's smile faded. She wasn't adaptable like some of the others. She kept trying to escape, kept screaming. I had to dispose of her. It was regrettable, but necessary. Webb wanted to reach across the table and strangle the man, but he kept his voice level. How many others were there? I lost count, Henderson said. 15? 20? Some worked out. Some didn't. The ones who didn't adapt, well, they're scattered across several states. You'll never find them all. The confession was damning, sickening, but it also provided closure to families who'd been searching for answers for decades. Over the following months, Henderson led investigators to burial sites across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. 17 sets of remains were recovered. 17 children who'd been taken, tortured, murdered, and buried in unmarked graves. But the most disturbing revelation came when Henderson mentioned that the network hadn't died with Sutherland. There were others. Men who traded children like commodities, who used coded language in internet chat rooms, who'd adapted their methods for the digital age. The investigation Henderson's arrest triggered is ongoing. The FBI's Crimes Against Children Division has identified at least 6 other men who were part of the network. 3 have been arrested. 2 died before they could be charged. 1 remains at large. October 2025. Sarah Cross, formerly Emma Brennan, stood at the edge of the cemetery in Cedar Falls, looking down at her father's headstone. Leaves swirled around her feet, autumn painting the world in shades of gold and rust. Linda stood beside her, their hands clasped together. They'd been rebuilding their relationship for a year and a half now. It wasn't easy. Sarah still had nightmares, still struggled with anxiety and PTSD, still sometimes called out Dad in her sleep and meant Robert Sutherland, not David Brennan, and the guilt of that would consume her for days afterward. But she was healing, slowly, with therapy and time and the unwavering support of her family, both the one she'd been born into and the one she'd built as Sarah Cross. I wish I'd known him better, Sarah said softly, referring to David. I have these fragments of memories. Him singing in the car. Him making me laugh. Him telling me he loved me in that basement. But they're just fragments. He would be so proud of you, Linda said. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You built a life. You're raising beautiful children. You're helping other children every day as a nurse. That's his legacy, Emma. That's his gift to you, the strength to keep going." Sarah nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I think about the others sometimes. Jennifer. The ones Henderson killed. The ones we don't even know about. I survived and they didn't. Why? I don't know," Linda admitted. "But I know that you surviving means something. It means Sutherland and Henderson didn't win. They didn't break you. They didn't erase you. You're still here." They stood in silence for a while, the wind rustling through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn and change and time moving forward despite everything. Finally, Sarah turned to her mother. "Thank you for never giving up on me, for searching all those years, for believing I was still out there." Linda squeezed her hand. "You're my daughter. I would have searched forever." As they walked back to the car, Sarah looked over her shoulder one last time at David's grave. She whispered words that the wind carried away. "Thank you for protecting me, Dad. I'm sorry it cost you everything. I'll make sure people remember you. I'll make sure they know you died a hero." And she kept that promise. Sarah began speaking at events for missing children organizations, sharing her story, advocating for better investigation techniques, pushing for more resources for families of the missing. She became a voice for those who had no voice, a light for those still searching in the darkness. The case of David and Emma Brennan, which began with a car buried under a highway in 2024, ended up changing policies, training protocols for law enforcement, and awareness about child trafficking networks across the country. From tragedy came purpose. From horror came hope. But the investigation isn't over. Not really. Because somewhere out there, in quiet retirement communities and suburban neighborhoods, members of Sutherland and Henderson's network are still living free. Still watching the news about Emma's recovery. Still worrying that they might be next. And in the FBI's office in Quantico, Agent Marcus Webb keeps files on 17 sets of remains that have been recovered and 43 children who are still missing, possibly taken by the network, possibly still alive somewhere, living under false names, not knowing who they really are. Webb won't stop looking, just like Linda Brennan didn't stop looking. Because every child deserves to be found. Every family deserves closure. Every victim deserves justice. The highway outside Amarillo has been repaired now, the section that was excavated to retrieve David's car. Traffic flows smoothly over the spot where a father and daughter's final journey was hidden for 38 years. Most drivers don't know the story, don't know what was buried beneath their wheels. But those who do know can never forget, can never drive that stretch of road without thinking about David Brennan fighting to save his daughter. Without thinking about Emma Brennan surviving against impossible odds. Without thinking about all the others who weren't as lucky. This is their story. A story about love and loss, and the terrible things human beings are capable of doing to each other. But also a story about resilience, about hope, about the refusal to give up even when the world seems determined to bury the truth. Some mysteries get solved. Some victims come home. And sometimes, after 38 years of searching, a mother gets her daughter back. That's not nothing. In a world full of darkness, that's everything. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the thousands of missing children still out there waiting to be found, then subscribe to Ultimate Crime Stories. We tell the stories that need to be told, the cases that haunt investigators, the families that refuse to give up hope, the victims who deserve to be remembered. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because every week we bring you cases that will keep you up at night, investigations that span decades, and sometimes, just sometimes, the miracle of a life restored. The truth matters. Justice matters. And every story, no matter how dark, deserves to be told. This has been Ultimate Crime Stories. Thank you for listening.